Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI Insights, the Executive Brief. I'm Ben's AI avatar, and in this episode, Ben sits down with Dr. Kruti Lehenbauer, an accomplished economist, data scientist, and AI advisor with over 20 years of experience in academia and consulting. Drawing from her background as a former professor and her natural ability to spot patterns in numbers, Dr. Lehenbauer shares her unique approach to making data and statistics more accessible.
But data is something I'm very passionate about. Economics is something I'm very passionate about. And teaching is something I'm very passionate about. So it was the posted statistics series that you mentioned is kind of like a culmination of all of that coming together and having some fun.
The conversation explores thought-provoking perspectives on AI terminology, the role of bias in artificial intelligence, and practical approaches to helping small businesses leverage data analytics without enterprise-level costs.
Anything that goes through the artificial intelligence cog in one way, shape, or form can technically be called artificial intelligence, even if it just touches the cog slightly because of a prompt. I think that's where the definitions will improve over time.
Dr. Lehenbauer's commitment to finding the right solution for clients rather than pushing one-size-fits-all platforms offers valuable insights for business leaders looking to harness the power of data in their organizations. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of AI Insights, the Executive Brief. Today, I am super excited to have Dr. Kruti Lehenbauer. She is I wrote down so much stuff of economist, data scientist, AI advisor, doctor, like you just continue and continue and continue. But I mean, absolute genius. I've followed her on LinkedIn for quite a while now. She has a post-it notes type of commentary, also a newsletter. That's a very unique way of showing data. We'll talk about that, or information, or relaying information. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you do a more formal introduction, but let's start there.
Well, I mean, you said basically what I do, and it's a good way to capture what my expertise is in. It's like it's all over the place in a manner of speaking, but data is something I'm very passionate about. Economics is something I'm very passionate about, and teaching is something I'm very passionate about. So it was the posted statistics series that you mentioned is kind of like a culmination of all of that coming together and having some fun, because my life experiences have shown me that most people are scared of data and math. And that's because someone somewhere along the way told them that they sucked because they got something wrong. And I'm on a mission to change that.
So I can relate, especially to the math portion of that. I failed pre-algebra in 8th grade. I was always told, and I talk about this, I was always told that not that I was stupid, but I was never told I was smart, right? And even when I was trying to get into college, when I was, I think, 17, I scored a 16 on my ACT. And so I labeled myself as being dumb. Little did I know as I matured and grew up that I just had a different way I learned and absorbed information. But jumping back to the post-it and the sticky notes, post-it note series that you do, anyone, if you're listening to this and you haven't checked it out, I promise you, check it out. It's the coolest thing. At first I saw it, I'm like, that's AI generated, or there's some kind of technology with it. Is it, or are you writing the notes and then recording? How does it work? It's so fascinating.
You asked that. I'm so glad you asked that, because I get asked that all the time. And so I have like this whole book that I write and draw and create these things every day. And then I just stick them on for, myself to refer to later on.
Now, do you film it while you're drawing them and writing them, and that's how you produce the final content?
So, okay. So don't laugh at me. This is
amazing.
Low tech, old school. I have a little container like this that I put on my desk and my phone. And I just go to the quick record option in the camera, and I put my phone like this, and I draw underneath that. And then that's the video. And I think I mentioned earlier, I'm not a huge fan of editing. So I leave it as is for the most part. I do use ClipJam to do the audio voiceover. just so that it is concise.
Okay.
When I talk, as you can see, I tend to go all over the place.
You, but with a consistent flow and a good train of thought, though. So you,
I mean, I do write up the script
yeah,
but at least that way there are no,
right,
you know,
right. So you
right.
have, it's really cool. Now, I got another interesting question that I was wondering about. So you're all these different, and now we're adding artist into that too. So artist, we're going to add that into there. But sometimes like computer and technology and that kind of stuff comes first. Was the economist portion and that interest in the economy and those types, was that first, which led into technology, or was it technology and then you found a passion and interest in the economy along the way? Which order did this did this start?
Well, so my biggest passion is math.
Okay.
And so data is something that I call it a blessing. It's like a natural ability that I've always had to see patterns in numbers.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see patterns in life, but I do see patterns in numbers.
Yep.
And so I pursued that, and economics, so I started doing an engineering degree. I hated it because I was boxed in by what a code could and couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found economics where I could take data, I could take statistics, and I could apply it to real life situations. That was my learning style.
Yeah.
And then as, you know, technology improved and data became easier to get and larger to do, just because I could see a pattern, but how do I measure it? How do I test it?
Yeah.
And that's where I started using coding and technology over and above what I was learning in grad school.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess then it just, that's what I started doing. So it's like a marriage of all of these different things coming together. In my mind, they are not separate. So that I really had a hard time when I first started on LinkedIn. It's like, what do I call myself?
Right.
But
and did that lead into, so you're a founder and owner of Analytics TX, and so that passion of what you're talking about with math, obviously some of the economy, but teaching, obviously you do a lot of teaching when you're consulting and in the entrepreneur area you're in. Did that feed into that? Did you go from big corporate into this, or have you always been in that entrepreneurial mindset?
Oh, I guess we didn't talk about it. I was a professor for 20 years.
Okay.
And after teaching for 20 years and, you know, I don't know, about 25, 30 PhD students and everything, it just felt like the right time to just exclusively jump into consulting rather than just doing that on the side. So even though I've been consulting for close to 15 years, I switched to full-time consulting just a couple of years ago.
Okay. All right. And then spoiler alert to the audience, AI's been out for longer than a year. We've been using AI before GPT. When did you first start really looking at the data science and, you know, machine learning and those kind of aspects of AI? How long have you really been digging into or aware of that?
About 15 years,
okay.
I would say. We didn't ever call it AI.
Right.
We didn't ever call it machine learning. But then for that matter, we didn't call it data science either. We just called it statistics. Good old fashioned, right? So it was statistics and coding or programming. And so I, of course, learned how to do the coding and programming back in grad school about 20 years ago. But actually starting to implement it in the real world, like I said earlier, as it became easier for bigger data sets to be collected, we could no longer just use calculators or simple Excel to solve some of the problems.
Yep.
And that's where it really helped to start, learning the code so that we were not doing the same model again and again and writing the same lines out. Right. But yeah, I call it brute force coding is how I learned it. It's like I still do that. I still write out everything line by line by line. Mm-hmm. And then kind of go back and be like, okay, I can create a loop out of this. Oh, I can do this out of this, to make it easier for others to read.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a lot more sophisticated approach. Mine, I call Frankenstein code because especially when I was coding, now I use AI to help me, right? Assisted AI coding. But when I started, I was coding in LAMP, right? Like Linux and Apache, MySQL and PHP. I'd find a code snippet on Google and I'd be like, okay, this, and then I would adopt it. And then I would go find another, and it was a total Frankenstein monster of code, but it worked. It was functionable and it was great. Now, you and I have had some back and forth on LinkedIn, and it's funny with AI back, I'd say last January, so about a year ago. And you mentioned this, how we didn't used to call it AI. All these businesses went from being a normal cybersecurity company or a regular data company or regular cloud company. Now they're all AI companies.
mhm.
And there's no regulation on calling yourself an AI, but what I've found is there is really little real AI. And I look at like an LLM as actually being actual AI, right? So using language models and things like that are AI. And then there's analytics and automation. But again, we've been doing analytics and automation. So how have you looked at, maybe through a humorous lens, of this adoption or this AI hysteria, or how have you looked at it?
Okay, this is gonna sound weird, but
Hmm.
there's a whole element of humor in it. So let's
Okay.
keep that in mind. um, I think that calling it artificial intelligence is the problem.
Mm. Yep.
I would call it artificial ignorance
Hmm.
or artificial stupidity.
Yep.
And the reason there's a difference between this, I had this discussion with somebody recently. What is the difference between being stupid and being ignorant? Right? So it's like if a 10-year-old decides to jump off a roof because they want to be like Superman, would you call them stupid or ignorant? And it's like, well,
Right.
if they knew the consequences of falling down, whether they're like Superman or not, then
Right.
that was stupid.
Right.
If they did not realize the consequences of falling down, then it was ignorant.
Hmm.
The current state of the AI is somewhere between these two extremes.
Right.
So the word intelligence is kind of pushing it. Uh,
Right.
but because,
It's definitely pushing the, yeah.
I mean, if somebody told you that when you were 10 years old, no, there's no way you can fall down. Even if you fall down, you're not going to get hurt.
Right.
Then, at the end of the day, the blame lies on the person who told you that.
Right.
And also in the fact that you believe them. But
Yep.
since this is artificial, it's not a question of believing, but it's a question of taking the input. And
Yeah.
we as humans are still dictating what goes in to these AI models.
Yep.
So we do own the level of stupidity and ignorance that comes out on the other end of the outputs of the AI.
Absolutely. It's funny as you talk about that. I'm going to throw another one in there, which is bias. And there's that bias conversation in AI. And I've heard people say, that my GPT or Claude or whatever they use, it has a biased response. Well, you have to understand that your GPT and Claude is wanting to please you. AI is inherently it wants to please and wants to just affirm your responses. So a lot of times, if you're getting a bias, and I'm not talking about an inappropriate bias or anything like that, but I'm talking if you're getting bias in your responses, it's probably because it is biased to your own biases, right? So yeah,
It's impossible to have intelligence without bias. That is
yeah.
one thing that we all need to remember.
Interesting.
Whatever our level of intelligence is, whatever we claim, whatever we know, whatever we don't know, is inherently dependent on what we have learned.
Yeah.
We may not be conscious about it, but that does not, I challenge anyone who says that they are not biased to prove that they are not biased.
In some way. Absolutely. Yeah.
Because you can't prove it.
Yep.
Bias is subjective.
Yep.
And so blaming AI for being biased is meaningless. Yes, it is important to remember that the responses, the output, all of this has a bias. But to say that it is biased objectively, that doesn't make sense.
Right. Yeah. And there will be, and there are So there are biases it does remove. Just thinking this, there are biases, and I think in like the healthcare setting. So there's a lot of people, and I don't think we're ready to use it as a AI doctor or anything like that. It's definitely not to prescribe or even diagnose, right? Then you're WebMD diagnosing yourself. But when we do get to the point of maybe a intelligence, like actual intelligence, the bias of a human driving to work, maybe getting cut off in traffic, another interaction with the patient, frustration in the office, other things that might dictate to them to give a different type of care because they've had a bad day. That type of bias is eliminated, at least from AI, because it doesn't really care on how its day is or anything like that, right? So it doesn't have those. But then there's a whole other set of biases that it's going to have, from training biases to the way it evaluates data and the way it looks at data, the amount of data it's looked at that will inherently come out of it. So it's an interesting conversation when and it's the ebb and flow of technology and of man, right? It's this good and bad side. We're going to get good and bad out of it.
It's also user bias, right?
Yeah.
When I am using, say, ChatGPT as a low-hanging example, right?
Yeah.
If I'm using ChatGPT and I ask a certain question a certain way, it's the same thing that we've seen in surveys for years. You ask a question a certain way, and you're absolutely right. AI's bias is to please. So if I ask a question a certain way, I have tried this. I've experimented with this. I'll ask a question.
Mm-hmm.
I will get a response. And then my response to that response will dictate what the next response back would be.
Yeah.
And it could be diametrically 180 degrees opposite just because I reworded the way I asked the question. Yep.
Interesting.
And to me, when that happens, it takes away the objective factor of what I was seeking. So then it becomes useless to me. Yeah. It's like, oh, dude, you're just answering this based on what I'm asking. So, well, forget this. My kids always tease me. They're like, if AI ever becomes, like sentient,
right,
where it can actually go after somebody,
right?
Like, you're dead.
Yeah, you're in trouble.
Because of the way you talk to your AI.
That's funny. I try to remember that when I do have conversations with AI, but I talk to AI like a human just because it helps my thought process. But I do see that I'm like, there's times where I'm full on arguing, like, and upset at AI because I always use this example. I was wanting it to create a PowerPoint. GPT, simple thing, always does it. And it said, I can't create a PowerPoint. It actually told me, and I said, you created a PowerPoint for me last week. And it said, oh, I'm sorry, you're right. Let me create a PowerPoint. And it was almost like this lazy teenager response, like, nah, I don't want to do it.
I don't want to do it. Yeah.
It's like,
I didn't hear you, Mom. Yeah.
Right. It drives me. It's the funniest thing. Okay, now I want to jump back. We're having this conversation about the term AI, right? And the actual artificial and the intelligence, right? The artificial point is absolutely true. We're not at the intelligent portion. Now, in engineering, my engineering brain fights with that term artificial intelligence all the time. Machine learning, I can wrap my brain around that. But then I've been in technology long enough where I've seen marketing win the battle of terminology, right? Where the engineers and the technical people don't win this battle, marketing does. And you can see that marketing's winning this battle. So when I talk to people and companies and businesses and I do consulting, I have to use this term artificial intelligence is because that's how they're wrapping their brain around it. But it is frustrating. And I use like Secure Access Service Edge, SASE, as an example, is I hated that term when it came out. I was like, that's just SD-WAN and other components wrapped into a framework. It's the same thing, but marketing won the battle. Gartner won the battle and now it's productized basic. And, the engineering side of my brain lost that battle. Probably the same with AI, right? I mean, we have to still relate to the people because that's what it's being called all the time. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm smiling because the word data scientist itself, like I said, it's good old-fashioned statistics. Mm-hmm. But no, we don't call that. The minute I put statistics, people are like, oh, yeah, too much. Data scientist? Oh, that's cool. Okay, right. It's marketing.
What about, and I know prompt engineering's a thing, but a prompt engineer, like that term of that, like you're good at prompting, you're good at talking about AI, but are you an engineer at that point?
It reminds me of something that is going to sound so silly, but bear with me. Yeah. Okay. It's an evolution of how we talk, walk, and grow.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a kid, the only place where I used or heard the term engineer was when I talked about somebody who was driving a train,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And so I still remember I was in 5th grade, and one of my classmates said that she wanted to grow up to become an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, she was not talking about driving a train. And I still remember going, wow, that's a big, goal to have.
Right.
In 5th grade. Now, if you were 5, that's cool. But, and I remember going, so I went and asked an adult, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
why would someone say that they want to do this?
Mm-hmm.
They go, what do you think engineering means? And when that question was asked, and I know it was a very, very long time ago, but I've never
Mm-hmm.
forgotten it. The reason I bring that up is because every time we misinterpret a term, sometimes it helps to take a step back and ask ourselves what we think it means versus what others around us think or know what it
Right. Yeah.
means.
That's particularly important now, right? Especially with so many terms that are being reimagined, reused, and changed to fit into this scope of AI. And data scientists I think there are data scientists out there, because that word scientist even means something totally different, right? In my head as we're having that. But yeah, I go into that same thing. But it's a good point to think about, like, okay, like if you're trying to explain it, I guess it can make sense, even though the literal brain of me, which is that engineering brain, is like, no, it's not right. But yeah, I guess to most people, I can see what you're saying. That makes sense. Now,
And some of it is also being actually driven by AI itself. Don't forget it.
true.
The marketing itself is being heavily influenced by AI itself. So AI is driving its own marketing.
And to that, I had another question, but now I'm just thinking it's almost like AI. Again, it's been around for a while, but now the use of AI, most companies I talk to can't explain it. Most people who sell AI can't explain it. Even when I talk to them, I'm like, you're not even on the market. Do you think it's just they're grasping to try to explain what it is? And it's so outside of how we regularly explain technology, whether it's software, hardware, networking, cybersecurity. It's so different. They're just like, how else do we explain this? I don't think the marketing teams have a grasp on how to really explain what AI is. And again, even people who do AI, I don't think are doing a great job. Many of them aren't doing a great job.
Well, I think it goes back to that definition thing. Like if I asked you, what is science?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd say it's like a study, right? Like something an empirical study of whatever you're wanting with. Yeah, I mean,
Because it follows the scientific method.
yeah, I'm going through the scientific process, scientific method, and all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So anything that goes through the artificial intelligence cog in one way, shape, or form can technically be called artificial intelligence, even if it just touches the cog slightly because of a prompt.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the definitions will improve over time. You said something earlier about pre-algebra, and that made me I'm bringing that back for a reason. When we were younger, when I say we, I don't mean you. When we were younger, my generation, we didn't have pre-algebra or pre-calculus. It was just algebra, calculus, trigonometry. And even before that, it was simply math. Right? So that breakdown of what counts as algebra versus pre-algebra, calculus versus pre-calculus has been defined over time as the needs and the systems have evolved.
Yeah.
I actually had this argument with my kids yesterday. They were like, well, maybe it was easier for you when you were our age. And I'm like, no, it wasn't.
Right.
You didn't have 3 different branches of science to study. I said, no, we did. We just called them one textbook. It was just called science.
Right.
We didn't call it physics, chemistry, biology, even though it was clearly divided up into those things. I said, but however, over time now, it was realized that separating them out and teaching them separately made more sense, which is why it's being done that way. So my hope for AI is that eventually we're kind of going to go back to this pre-hype stage where we will actually be able to split up the generative AI portion, the predictive AI portion, the building of AI portion into neater boxes so that people can identify what they need, when they need it, and for what they want to apply it.
That's great. Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. Now, I'm going to jump into a little bit of that method there, a little bit with AI, but more into the analytics and into what you're doing from a consulting standpoint. I mentioned this before we started this session, and you work, I think, you work small business, mid enterprise, probably all the way to like mid enterprise to enterprise. But you do have a lot of documentation or some documentation on the website that points to small businesses. And I mentioned how small businesses, it's kind of a miss. They're always kind of the missed technology segment where they get the scraps of everybody else's technology, but it's never really that great. And I see that with AI. I mean, aside from the regular like GPT and the regular AI tools that we use every day, how are you using analytics, which I know isn't necessarily AI, but analytics into these conversations that make sense for a small business? What are you uncovering? Like, what's your starting point? What does that process look like for a small business?
Well, my experience with small businesses indicates that one of the reasons why they end up kind of holding the bag, so as to speak, it's a twofer. One is we hear more about the Gartner reports. We hear more about the Deloitte reports. And they work with enterprises who can afford their costs.
Right.
So we tend to think that enterprises are getting the best of the best. But that's actually not true. Because there are a lot of people that small businesses can leverage for the prices that they can afford to get the solutions that they need. Kind of going back to what we said, do we stick a sticker on it that says AI? Probably not. But that's what that automation of systems. When I talk with them, one of the things that I hear all the time is, oh, but we have dashboards. Oh, Google Analytics gives us how many people have visited our website.
Right.
We have that information. And it's like, how are you leveraging it though?
Right.
What are you doing with that information? If it is sitting in a pretty little report on your desk, it's useless.
Yep.
So the point that I keep trying to emphasize when dealing with small to medium-sized businesses is, one, it's not as expensive as you think it is if you want to transform and kind of, get with the program. You don't have to hire a Deloitte. You don't have to hire a McKinsey to do this for you. So it's not a question of postponing it until you can afford it, but rather finding what you can afford for what you need resolved. Because if you start building that up, some of the costs are really high right now because some of the technology is really new. Like with everything else, it's going to become cheaper over time. Whether you'll be able to buy it or adapt it at that time, when the prices go down, will depend on how prepared you are to begin with. So if a small or medium-sized business has started automating its processes, started checking if all their ducks are in a row or not, then it becomes easy for them to get a tool that can bridge that gap.
Right.
But if they're just going to wait for the tool to become cheaper and then be like, oh, you know what? I need to cut, I'm just using, I want to cut the squash, but I'm going to wait for the chainsaw to become cheaper. That's a problem. Use a knife.
Right.
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 So
chainsaw could be messier too.
Yeah, but you can't say, well, everybody else is using chainsaws to cut their trees. I don't have a tree, so I guess I'll just wait. No, you buy a knife.
Yeah.
It's the same mindset that prevents a lot of small businesses from growing because they assume that something's going to cost them a lot. And there are a lot of people, you're a consultant yourself, I'm a consultant, I know a lot of other solopreneurs and very small business owners whose entire passion lies around helping people with growing, right? And it's just a question of being able to trust others like you would want to be trusted,
right?
If you're a small business, right?
Yeah.
So you don't want to get thrown out of the market. Oh my God, he's a solopreneur. She just, no.
Yeah.
Shop around. I'm not saying everybody's made equal.
Right.
But to say that, oh, let me throw the baby out with the bathwater because, we are nowhere close to being able to spend $1 million. Your problem could maybe be solved in $10,000. You haven't even investigated it.
What I like about what you do is a lot of companies are coming in with a solution looking for a problem. And I feel like, and I do the same thing, but I feel like you approach it more where you're going to go into the business, you're going to learn about the business, you're going to find the problem, and then you're going to develop a solution that solves for that problem. Is that a fair assessment of how you approach things?
It is spot on. I've
Yeah.
been asked multiple times if I have a package or a
Right.
product, and I don't. Because Benjamin's needs are going to be very
Yes.
different from Robert's needs. And I can't, the way I work with my ethical requirements, can't just say, all right, Benjamin, you and Robert can both pay for this. And if it works for you, great. If not, good luck. No.
Right.
In fact, a lot of the people that I've worked with them for 13, 15 years, and I still continue getting projects because it's a question of establishing that credibility.
Yeah. I get a lot. When are you coming out with a platform? When's your platform coming out? And I said, well, I have a framework of how I operate within and how I solve problems. And sometimes you go outside that framework when there's a unique problem that I have to solve and I have to bring someone else in. But as far as the main conversations, which I call talking to your data, right? And especially your internal data, I have a framework. And unfortunately, a platform would work very well for one company and maybe two companies. But then what about company 3, 4, and 5 that has a different need and may even need a different overall model to solve, whether it's a data organizational and cleansing model or a different LLM or different other type of AI model. So yeah, it's interesting because I do see the need though, if you have a platform that solves for 100,000 or 1 million type of businesses, great. And we see them out there. I think there's a lot of AI like voice agent platforms out there that do a pretty good job and that's good. But overall, yeah, I love that approach of like, hey, I'm going to solve from the people, the processes, and then I'm going to bring in the technology last, and that's what it is.
And also, I know a lot of people who do have the platforms that would work perfectly once the problem is identified.
Right.
So there have been more than a few times when I would talk to a client and after I talk with them, I'm like, okay, based on everything you've shown me, you don't need me, but you need this guy or you need this girl because they already have the exact solution for your problem. Yep. And I'm perfectly okay with that because I would much rather help that client and help them remember that they had a problem that got solved rather than, oh my God, but I'm just giving it away to somebody else. No. Right. No, I'm not reinventing the wheel. It's already there.
I love that. Whether I've been in sales or just in human relationships, you get so much more out of just solving problems. Like and if you're an entrepreneur or even a salesperson listening, just solve problems. And I've made more money by bringing people in and not even getting paid on something because that's remembered, it's appreciated, and you're known as that person who can go in and solve multiple problems within whatever that business structure or whatever that structure is. It's not, I talk to people all the time. They're like, well, why would I bring you in if I don't get paid? And I'm like, well, first of all, you can now, right? Like I've worked through that. But even at that time, it's like, it's not about that. It's about solving a problem with someone you trust. So yeah, I absolutely love that. So I've been trying to hit, I could talk to you for hours and I know we're going to have some follow-up conversations, you and I, because this is great. I try to hit 20. We're at 30. So I'm going to leave that.
I'm sorry.
No, it's a good thing. Don't be sorry at all. I'm sorry we have to stop. Leave last thought. I'd love to just, if you have any last thoughts, whatever it is. Sometimes I catch people off guard with this because they don't have any last thoughts. If you want to reiterate something, whatever that is, I'll leave it with you.
I'll just say one thing, and I say it a lot. At some point, if you're a small business owner or a solopreneur or a consultant, get past your own fears. Mm-hmm. Because it's when you get into that outside of that comfort zone, that's where you're going to find your growth. Yeah. And so just let it be. Nobody cares. Be you.
I think that's great life advice, right? I think that's awesome. Now, if people want to get a hold of you, obviously you're doing some amazing thing with analytics and your consulting and what you do, and then again, follow you. LinkedIn's a great place to follow you. Is there any other ways, or is LinkedIn the best way to just DM you and get a hold of you?
LinkedIn is the best way. I mean, I do have a website and all that, but I mostly focus my energies on LinkedIn. I know amazing people. So even if I can't help you, but you need help, I will find you the right person who
Right.
can help you. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I honestly appreciate your time. I can't wait to collaborate with you more, but have a wonderful rest of your day and thank you.
Thank you.